All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Teach Access Student Academy. I'm Mindy Colin. I'm the Director of Development and Industry Partnerships. We are so glad that you are here. Just a few things to note before we jump into our session. We are committed to making this event accessible. To turn on captions, you can use the CC button located at the bottom of your toolbar. We have American Sign Language interpretation available during the sessions, and they are spotlit throughout the whole time. If you need additional help, you could send us a message via the chat and just send it to the hosts and panelists, and we can try and take care of any other needs that you might have. We invite you to engage in this session, participate in the chat. It will be available. Our upcoming presenters are looking forward to having a casual conversation with you. Ask questions. You can also include those questions in the Q&A feature located in the bottom of the toolbar as well. Take notes or don't take notes. It's up to you. Whatever works best. Quiet listening counts too. If you need to step away, stretch, or take breaks, please feel free. We understand. We want to make sure to thank our project team who's helped put this event together: Deanna, Ian, Ruth, Jennifer, Lexi, and Sherry. And of course, we want to make sure to thank our sponsors for ensuring this event is free and open. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, Microsoft. Thanks to ADP, Google, Meta, Salesforce, and Skyscanner. All right. Now I would like to introduce our speakers. Kristian Burch and Shyanne Fullerton from Salesforce. Read a little bit about their bios and then turn it over to them. Kristian serves as the Director of Accessible Technology at Salesforce, where he leads initiatives to ensure all employees have equitable access to internal technology and products. As part of the Office of Accessibility, he oversees accessible procurement practices and maintains a library of assistive technology resources for employees across the organization. Kristian's expertise focuses on creating inclusive technology environments that enable all team members to perform at their highest level. His work ensures that accessibility is seamlessly integrated into Salesforce's internal technology ecosystem, supporting both compliance requirements and employee success. Shyanne Fullerton is currently a digital accessibility engineer at Salesforce. Shyanne works closely with product teams to enhance accessibility features and create user-friendly experiences for people with disabilities. With a career spanning roles in software testing, business analysis, and accessibility coaching, Shyanne has developed a well-rounded skill set in front-end development, UX research, and assistive technologies. She's passionate about collaborating with others to solve complex challenges in technical implementation and user-centered design. Shyanne's journey reflects adaptability, continuous learning, and commitment to creating a more accessible digital world. All right. Thank you both for being here. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mindy, for that introduction. So, as Mindy mentioned, my name is Shyanne. I'm a digital accessibility engineer for Salesforce. I've been at Salesforce for about 2 years. My first accessibility role ever was 8 years ago at Level Access, a consulting firm that is hired by other companies to test and remediate accessibility issues. So, we're going to talk more about our roles in detail, but I'm going to pass it to Kristian so he can introduce his role and also how he got into accessibility.
Thank you, Shyanne. Kristian Burch. I have been with Salesforce. Next month it'll be, I think, 13 years. And so my first 7 years I spent working with our support team, and was able to build out our very first accessibility support team that, I saw a case come in one time from a customer that used JAWS screen reading software, and a support engineer, did their level best to try and help them. However, they said, "Oh, it's third-party software, so this is really out of scope." And I was like, "No, like we can't do that." So we created an amazing world-class accessibility support team to help our customers that encountered accessibility issues or have accessibility questions with our product. And then that led me over to working with our Office of Accessibility, where I've been the last 7 years. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and really excited for this conversation with you today, Shyanne.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristian. I don't think I ever heard you actually say 13 years. That's a long time. For someone who started out in QA and never heard the word accessibility as a software tester earlier in my career, I think it's so fascinating to meet people such as yourself who have a 10-year spanning, probably back to WCAG 1.0 or something. And I think now we're at like 2.2. Yeah, so today we're talking about how accessibility is the skill that can future-proof your tech career. It's important for you all to have a why when navigating this career in accessibility. So we're going to talk more about our personal whys, and hopefully open the minds of some future accessibility professionals here on the call. So, just to kind of open up the floor to what a why can look like in accessibility typically. So, for some, the why is advocacy, right? If you explore the social model, you'll learn more about that. When you know disabled individuals who experience barriers, or you yourself experience barriers, or maybe you're just bursting with empathy. Another why tends to be economics, right? So maybe you see the financial impact of those barriers. Maybe you've done market research and found that accessibility has a financial impact to its employees as well as users. And then also, maybe you've heard the rumors that even AI is struggling with digital accessibility. So there's some job security there. And then last but not least, my personal why is I get a kick out of solving difficult problems. You can check out the functional solutions model if that's something that you can resonate with, but accessibility and accessible designs usually mean better designs for all. So I really do enjoy improving designs to include accessibility as well as universal design practices. Kristian, how about you? What's your why?
Yeah, mine goes way back, Cheyenne. I'll start by just saying, without aging myself, close to half of my life, I've been personally dedicated and committed to disability inclusion. I have a 22-year-old daughter who has Down syndrome. And so for, the majority of her life, my wife and I have been extremely involved in disability advocacy, selfishly for her, but also the impact that we've been able to have to help a number of people. And I'll come back to that, because obviously, my wife being able to ride her shoulders, be guided by her shoulders, or she's helped lead me to where the level of advocacy that I have, and so all credit to her. But I think back to my grandfather was deaf from the war. He went deaf in the Air Force well before I was born. And then my best friend happened to be deaf growing up. And so, I was exposed very early on to disabilities and to two of the closest people in my life. And then my mom was a special education teacher. And so we lived in a very small town on the Oregon coast, and we have a big, beautiful farm, and she would bring students home to our farm to check out the animals. And I remember multiple times of people with intellectual developmental disabilities joining her to come check out our animals. And then I moved up to Portland, Oregon, and I became friends with a kid my age who had a little brother who had Down syndrome. And then my wife and I, when we were 22 years old, had our child, and she was born with Down syndrome. So I felt like everything had been building up in my life to lead me to be prepared to really be not just a really good father, but also a really strong advocate for our daughter Carly. And I think back to the work my wife was leading with Disability Rights Washington, and really like being a strong advocate in a space that brings a lot of change. And for us, that was the public school system in Portland, Oregon. And we used to lead an educational inclusion conference called All Born In, with the intention that everybody is really born included, and it's society and and specifically public schools often that begin really segregating out people with disabilities, and and so we used to have like 800-900 people show up to this conference every year. Unfortunately, the organization that my wife was a leader with didn't survive the pandemic, but we had so much impact. And as I mentioned earlier, 6 years ago, we created this Office of Accessibility. And I was thinking to myself, man, I really appreciate being able to blend this personal passion and all this work that I've been doing over these last few years of my life with my professional life in technology. And I felt like if I can change the hearts and minds of school administrators, right, some of the folks that really, I think, um, do a job that they feel is the right thing for students. I think that most of the folks we worked with always had really good intent, but they were dealing with conflicting. Some parents wanted their kids segregated into special ed classrooms. My wife and I, though, we really were of the mind that people with disabilities need to be with their typically developing peers, with their neighborhood class, with their neighborhood friends in the same classrooms. And so I felt like if we could change the hearts and minds of these public school administrators that think they know everything, then I could do that in the corporate world. And so, for me, and then I think back, I used to work at Yahoo, worked at Yahoo for 8 years, and just little things throughout my career that speckled into helping get me where I am today. CAPTCHA, which most people are familiar with CAPTCHA. When you go to log into a web service of some sort, you have to complete these exercises to prove you're a human. And at the time, I think back to like 2008, one of the digital accessibility leaders at Yahoo, he's now with Google, Victor Sarin, reached out to me as I was the leader of our customer support team and said, hey, like, we need to figure out a process when someone who's blind or low vision tries to log in and they're presented with this CAPTCHA screen. How do we ensure that we're supporting these folks the way we should be? And I, back then, of course, we built a process and it worked really, really well. But it wasn't really until 6 years ago when I started doing this work full time that I realized the impact that I was having back then, even. And I was a tech support manager, but little did I know, like, just by helping with that one process, I made it so millions of people who are blind or low vision were able to access their Yahoo services. And so for me, the why has just been, very much, a personal passion of mine for my entire life. But selfishly, the last 20 years because of my daughter, and I care deeply. I've experienced disability multiple times in my life. I spent my first grade year being homeschooled because I had a traumatic injury and spent 6 months in a body cast and in and out of the hospital. And I've dealt with that in my life. And so I think there's times, as professionals, we all have that reason why, whether it's a family member, personal experience, lived experience, a close friend, and all of that, I think, has come together for me and leading me to where I really found my purpose in corporate America, and that's doing accessibility.
Well, Kristian, that was really in depth, and I applaud you for being vulnerable enough to really dig deep and explain your why. So whatever your why is, or anyone here on the call, whatever your why is, it's important you identify it and get comfortable with it, because accessibility is approached differently in each company, in each individual team. The attitude towards the mission varies drastically. So it will begin to potentially misalign with your why. So it's really important that you name it, you grasp it, and as your journey takes off, you keep that at your core. Um,
You
so
know,
just
I
go.
want to. We all want
Yeah.
to know your why too, Cheyenne.
Okay, yeah. I didn't plan on getting too vulnerable, but my why, it started out with originally, if I can be honest with you, I didn't know what accessibility was. I was trying to become a developer and I saw web accessibility and I thought that was what they called developer because I was like really young in my computer science career and I wanted to transition from testing to being a developer. And so I saw a job posting on Level Access. It said web accessibility and I thought, okay, help companies get access to the internet. But no, it was not. But oh my goodness, it was the most happy accident of my life. Yes, I think, oh no, that's the interpreter. Sorry, I thought that was someone trying to ask a question. But yeah, so my why started out as an accident and it was a happy accident because I do personally have what some may consider a disability. I never really identified it as such, but I am an epileptic person in society and it wasn't until I joined the accessibility world that I even found a community of people who had learned to adapt to a society that wasn't made for their reality. So all the different ways that I've learned to work around my differences, I learned to embrace it. It was a very personal journey for me because I had a lot of I don't want to say self-hate because I would never hate myself, but I had a lot of self disapproval for being different. And working in accessibility, I met so many amazing people who identify as being disabled with pride and understanding that there is a community for every difference that could exist, right? Because also being an African American woman, I experienced enough prejudice, right? So then to add disability on top of that, it's like I don't need another thing to make me different. But I really have learned to love the different thing about me. And it has made me just the most happiest in terms of careers. I've had a lot of careers, but this one has made me the most happiest. And I think when you look for your purpose and not just for pay, when you pick a career for purpose, it really helps navigate, as I mentioned before, as the attitude about accessibility varies so dramatically, it's very easy for me to stay grounded in my why and what I'm doing this for. And as developers push back, designers push back, project managers push back, oh, we don't have time, we don't have money. It's really important for me to in those moments, let them know you don't know who's using your software, right? Because they'll say, oh, blind people don't use our software, deaf people aren't using our software. And it's really important to bring in, first of all, invisible disabilities. As I mentioned, having epilepsy, that is an invisible disability. So I've gotten away with fitting in and seeming like I don't have a difference for a long time. And I think that puts me in a really unique position to coach these developers and designers on you don't know what your user's dealing with. You have no idea. You can't make assumptions about who and why and what they're doing. It's really important that you keep that in mind. You're designing it for yourself, and that's not a safe place to be. So that is my vulnerable moment. I trying to avoid shedding a tear, but it
Cheyenne,
really
thank you for honestly, thank you for sharing your story. I personally enjoy learning from you as well, and thank you for that. I like that you talk about like the monetary side too, right? Like, and I think a lot of people that are probably dialed in, right, realize we work for Salesforce, one of the
yeah,
largest software companies in the world. So not only are we getting to do this work that we're really passionate, we care about, but we're getting paid.
yes,
And how do we help other people, right? And so I love that that's got to be a part of this topic, right? And
yeah, I mean, if you want to talk money, yes, there's money to be made because it's a niche, right? You might be one of 100 applicants who can say they understand assistive technologies, and just the market share of users who rely on assistive technologies, you can immediately present that as a selling point right there in an interview, and it should be pretty clear about why you'll be the better candidate. So yes, bringing it back to the topic. Thank you so much, Kristian. We're talking about how this is going to future-proof your career, right? We want to make sure that we're choosing this because there is a future in it. And there absolutely is. There will always be a gap in between what designers and developers are prepared to engineer for and what the reality of the human users actually is. So yes, there is a market for it. And so just trying to stay a little bit on track because again, you guys opened up my heart today. We're going to dive a little bit deeper in what an accessibility professional actually does. Um, so since I did have my spill, Kristian, I'll let you go first. So from your POV, from your point of view, what does your role as a director and as an advocate actually look like on a daily basis?
Yeah, it one that is very I have to be very agile. Like today, for example, I was working on, doing some proactive reviews of some of our internal technology, and I got pinged by an employee. I apologize, this was yesterday. My days are all melding. I got pinged by an employee on Slack yesterday saying, "Hey, I encountered an accessibility barrier with this knowledge article in our internal knowledge base system," and that, yeah, obviously the proactive work and building my plan, right, is very important. But what's more important is this immediate need, right, from an employee. And so being able to have that agility to pivot, right, and remember where I left off in my project planning, right,
Mhm.
so that I don't lose my train of thought and focus there, but prioritizing immediately the impact of an employee with a disability. And so working in internal accessibility, for me, has been a place where I've get to support employees who are blind or low vision, employees who are deaf or hard of hearing, employees with physical disabilities and mobility related disabilities, and because technology crosses all of different disabilities. And so of course a large portion of the stuff that, or the work that I do, is to support our blind or low vision colleagues. But digital accessibility impacts everybody, right? Like placement of our iPads, for example, when you're checking into our office and making sure they're reachable by someone who's using a mobility device. The technology we use in our offices, the captioning and interpreting, and everything that goes into making virtual environments and virtual meetings accessible. Um, I I would say that one of the big things of how we gauge the success of this role is very hard to do, but I think we do it pretty well, and that's how are we putting measures and metrics behind and quantifying the impact we're having proactively, right? How do we know that if the work I'm doing proactively is successful? I gauge that on, we went live with an internal tool. Do any employees with disabilities report accessibility barriers, right? But that's kind of a reactive measure. But we need to be looking and thinking proactively. How are we finding, you know, because what we do needs to be quantified, right? And especially in this enterprise software area, we have to put together metrics and measures of everything we're doing. Um, and so that's a big part of it, is not just supporting people with disabilities and employees with disabilities and candidates with disabilities, and supporting internal teams like HR and our IT organization that are producing the tools and technology that our employees use, and making sure that they're accessible proactively, but also getting my leader and our executives the data that they need to validate this work that we're doing, and show the success and the impact from it. So it's a lot of, obviously, like in the weeds work, getting, like doing tests and doing reviews and supporting employees, and being like a player coach, right? Being part of the team that's doing these reviews and using a screen reader and testing work, but also being a leader in this space to be able to tell our story. And that's such an important thing. I think in the corporate world, everybody needs to be really good storytellers about the impact and the work that they're doing. And so for me, it's the storytelling, it's the supporting employees, it's being a proactive digital accessibility professional. There's obviously a lot of details that go into each of those, but those are the 3 or 4 main areas that I would summarize, Shyanne. And I've always been super keen on like the DAs, or sorry, the digital accessibility engineers, and the work that you do. And like how are you all getting to spend your day, right? Like, do you get assigned to a product, or is a team come to you and say, hey, we're going to go launch this and we need your review in the next week or the next day? Or do you get to be part of like a long-term scrum team? I'd love to learn from you too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were right. We do get assigned to a Scrum team. What usually happens is a Scrum team is designing a new feature or possibly just released a new feature, and an accessibility engineer comes in and identifies if any barriers need to be remediated. And then we provide the HTML, sometimes JavaScript, sometimes React code that opens up the scripting to assistive technology reception. Because assistive technologies interact with the HTML code in the back end and not the front end design of a user interface, there's usually a divergence between what the designers and developers' intention was and what the assistive technology interprets, right? For instance, if the focus order is not following the I focus order, right? If the keyboard focus order is not following the I focus order, that's something that we let the developers and designers know. We interpret if screen reader output is matching what we're visibly seeing on the screen. We look at designs and we determine if the information architecture, the way everything flows, if it's sensible, if there are any cognitive loads that are too heavy for a user that may result in a user abandoning the workflow. This is like taking UX and really examining every user's experience, right? And determining what code, what design changes need to be made so that users who rely on the keyboard or the screen reader or closed captioning or any other assistive technologies, what their experience is like. And is it just as effective as the experience that was prepared for a typical a, a typical ability user? Yeah, so reviewing codes, running audits, training engineers and designers, and preventing issues before a software is launched to the public is the core responsibilities that I've been performing for the past like 8 years.
What since we since we've got some computer science students in the audience, hopefully, what is your experience when you're working with another engineer who doesn't know much about accessibility? And like, I know y'all try to like leave them with some tips and tricks, and like, so that they leave these interactions also having some level of accessibility. But what is it like? Teach Access is obviously doing great work to get universities to require more accessibility in their core curriculum. But as a digital accessibility engineer professional, and you're dealing with other, computer science folks like yourself, Shyanne, but maybe they don't know anything about accessibility, what would be like one or two top things you would want every student in here to remember or to learn so that when they're interacting with a dedicated accessibility professional, they have some kind of like base foundation to start from?
Yeah. I'd want to say, and this is me being as honest as I can be, that accessibility is not a science. There's not one answer. There's not one approach. And a lot of it, not all of it, some of it can be subjective. And so give grace because a lot of times you may be dealing with an accessibility professional who personally does not use assistive technologies. So a lot of the industry knowledge that has been accumulated from assistive technology users can sometimes be up for interpretation. For example, WCAG, the Web Consortium of Accessibility Guidelines, leaves a large amount for interpretation because it was designed back when websites were like basic blog sites, right? Before websites can jump, hop, and skip and spin around. So we are constantly trying to morph what their intention was in those guidelines to where the internet is today. And it's not apples to apples. Oh, static. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Perfect word, because in comparison, websites are extremely dynamic right now. And a huge chunk of my work is politely asking designers and developers to keep it simple, right? Because there's egos in development, and you got all these skills to build great things that you sometimes forget that you're not building it for yourself and that it needs to be usable. I think one great example, and I don't know why this came to my mind, maybe because of the work I'm doing right now, not giving the user the ability to just type in a date, right? Because we want date pickers and we want calendars and we want the little scrolly things where you scroll to the month, scroll to. Imagine how complicated that is for someone who can't just flick it and get down to 1989, and they have to swipe, swipe, swipe hundreds of times to get to their exact birth date. Always having multiple options for input is something that I am like so keen on right now, because the websites are getting so cool that they're leaving people behind. So I don't know if I
No,
I missed the
you answered my
target there.
question perfectly. I like that you mentioned to give grace,
Mhm.
because like I think that kind of that leads well into like the next area that I think you and I were talking about when we were discussing the session, which is the emotion that comes into this work, right?
Absolutely.
And grace is needed from all around.
Mhm.
And you know, I'll give an example like that is not my story, so I won't name anybody names. But you know, we have our big conference, Dreamforce, every year, and we have a colleague who was working our disability answer desk that's there to support all of our guests with disabilities and all of the Dreamforce attendees with disabilities. And an attendee with a disability came over to the desk and just started berating our employee and my colleague who was working the desk, who also has a disability and also was relying on the exact same level of service that our guest was.
Yeah.
And the guest didn't know that, and just was is being very rude and yelling, and like, and I think about that situation as like an extreme. So you know that is not the norm, but it's a good representation of, let's, if we gave everybody grace, right? We all are doing this work because we care,
Yeah.
right? We care deeply. We're all passionate about this work. So when we get it wrong, it feels really bad, right? When I was in tech support, if I got it wrong with a customer, I'd do a, I wake up the next morning and I would do a root cause analysis and figure out what we do to, do better the next time. When you
Mhm.
get it wrong in this space, though, like when I get it wrong for an employee who's probably a friend, like it feels really bad. But
It
when we
does.
get things right, it feels really, really good, and we make some change. And so it's like those things you gotta. It's like when you're hiking up a mountain, or it's like you get your recovery on the downhill, right? So you recover on the reward, because there's going to be times we make mistakes. And like Cheyenne, I really appreciate you mentioning, let's give each other some grace.
Absolutely. And then in our position, we're working to get that trust. And that trust is never a straight road, right? There's going to be some steps forward and some steps backwards, but keep in mind your why. Keep in mind your why, and it will help when you're wrong. It will help when you got it a little bit off target. And because oh my goodness, talk about it being hard. Developers who are coming to me for advice, and if I give them the wrong piece of code and it doesn't work, and they'll take it out on me. They'll look at me. I've had people tell me accessibility is a joke, it's a bottleneck, and these are developers and designers who are upset because a lot of times their introduction to accessibility is through audits or lawsuits or very hostile engagements with users or with people who are trying to purchase their software, and they're reading the VPAT or the AC. The VPAT is the voluntary accessibility disclosure, as well as the ACR, the accessibility conformance report. They'll read those things and they'll just come back at the developers really harsh, and then they'll come and take it out on the accessibility professional like, hey, you made us look stupid, you made us look like we don't know what we're talking about. And I have to, again, give myself grace, give them grace, and remind myself why I'm doing this, because it's a thankless job. If I can be honest, it's a thankless. I mean, not always, right? Because you do get those moments where you get user feedback and they're like, wow, I really appreciate that you guys put this alternative input method in. I'm really frustrated with calendars, date pickers, and things like that. And then you'll know in your mind that you influence the designer and developer to do that. So just a little pat on your own back sometimes goes a long way because I'm gonna tell you, the companies, they'll come and find you when there's a problem, but you'll rarely, but not at Salesforce. Let me get that straight. I've worked accessibility at plenty of companies. Salesforce really walks what they talk. They really do support their accessibility professionals. They really are growing their team and addressing their issues with proactivity. But in the past, in previous roles, I've had like really, really bad attitudes towards accessibility as a professional in general. And I don't want to open any wounds, so I'll just stop there.
Well, I think the real talk is good, Cheyenne, because like people need to know when I'm going to learn accessibility, and this session is specifically about the career and how these careers are, obviously amazing careers that will last forever and are highly sought after, and we'll get into that. But we have to be real, right? Because you don't get into this work and then just think it's all going to be, you're going to be making lives better for millions of people with disabilities. There's emotions that come into it, and so we got to keep that real talk. Things that I think you and I both wish we had been told, right? So we could better prepare ourselves.
Yeah.
And so going into like career insurance and like how I will say my first 7 years here, again, I was in the support team talking to multi-million dollar customers. In fact, and even in the Office of Accessibility, I've led a lot of those initiatives. I will say for Salesforce, every company we sell our products to, whether it's large enterprise, customers, and I can share because these are public customers like Google, Amazon, they care deeply about supporting their employees with disabilities. So when they go to buy productivity software or CRMs, right, they're coming to Salesforce and they're saying, hey, I got to make sure these are going to be accessible. We're hearing the same thing from every public sector customer, whether they're in Europe and they're required by the European Accessibility Act or the United States and they have to follow Section 508. It's public, right? So we have, many federal agencies that use Salesforce and they are bound by law and regulatory requirements. So there's always going to be this need to have this work done. And until every university begins requiring accessibility, right, this specialty is going to be like, I think, a big career differentiator. I know for sure if you come apply at Salesforce as an engineer, if you have accessibility on your resume, you're probably going to make it pretty far in the interviews because we're pushing every product team. So every product leader, every engineering manager is hearing about accessibility, right? Your executive, Paula Goldman, was just talking about it at company kickoff, right, in front of the whole company a couple of weeks ago. People care, and I'd say, this is a space for me. I don't think I'll ever not work in accessibility again after doing this. This is where I'm going to spend the rest of my career.
Hi, this is Mindy. We do have a question, which I think timing wise fits with the direction of this conversation. But someone asked, how do you recruit and seek candidates for your staff? The comment says, we train a team of grad computer science students each year in our university accessibility team who remediates course materials for accessibility. But what they learned here maps well to web development, app development, device development, alt text headings, color contrast, etc.
I would say for students, right, we have our Future Force program. So we have an amazing university recruiting initiatives. And you can find all of that on our careers website. For professionals that have been doing this work for 5 years or more, we have our careers.salesforce.com website, and that's where you can find all of our open roles. And you won't see, and I think, maybe in the next 5 years or so, as more universities begin requiring accessibility, you won't see accessibility as a job requirement, but you'll surely be asked about it in the interviews. And because what we don't want to do is we don't want to, like a lot of job descriptions scare a lot of people away. And so we want those decisions to be made at the manager level still. But the managers are asking about accessibility because they're being pushed on accessibility by Shyanne and her team. Shyanne, how did you find the role at Salesforce as an accessibility professional?
Yeah, I was actually in a group chat with Level Access employees that had moved to new positions, and one of my old colleagues from Level Access posted the position had opened and that they were expanding their accessibility design team. And Derek, Derek was how I heard about it. So it's really happy to had been in the chat room that day when he posted it, and I applied. But I just want to encourage everyone to know that you already have accessibility in your stack. Your semantic HTML, your meaningful error messages, all of those things count. So brag about accessibility on your resume because I'm sure the things that you're already learning with software development, and as long as you're using semantics properly, is bringing built-in accessibility to the table.
Any other questions, Mindy?
Not in, oh, wait, sorry. Yes, something just came into the Q&A. Oh, it just says, tell your recruiters who go out to college and career fairs about your need for this skill. Okay, yes. And so,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And yeah, I think recruiters themselves, and I think this is helpful for everybody to know. People that aren't really doing this for a living and or don't have, themselves have a disability or a close family member, people get afraid to talk about disabilities and accessibility. They're going to say the wrong thing. And that's true for recruiters. That's true for engineers. It's an area we need to build safety to have these conversations and know that people are going to sometimes say the wrong things. But recruiters, definitely, this is a space for us to ensure. So that is great feedback. And I will say, as an accessibility leader as well, get plugged in with your local. Go to meetup.com and look up find your community. Get plugged in with the disability community. Attend conferences. I see Teach Access at like Enabling Disability In, CES in Vegas. There's so many conferences out there. There's so many disability organizations out there, and find the disability community. Get connected. Get plugged in. And meet other accessibility professionals in those networks.
Yeah, and if you can, try and start your career at a consulting firm like Level Access or similar. And I say that because in that one position, you'll get eyes and hands on so many different code sets, right? Because each customer that comes, they have a whole different document, a whole different HTML, DOM, a whole different way of doing things. You'll get so much experience in like 1 year than you would ever get in 1 year at a company being the on-site subject matter expert for one company. If you're out there auditing day in and day out, there would not be an accessibility issue that you have not come across. So that's for anyone interested in the web accessibility specialist role rather than the CPACC type of role.
We do have another question in the chat. How do you balance accessibility initiatives with fast-moving product timelines in a large organization?
We don't. We don't. I'd be lying to you if I told you it's clean, it's smooth, and we get it all right and get it all done every time. We don't. Backlogs exist. Things get rolled over and over, and we have to pivot and prioritize every sprint. Agile development has changed quality assurance all around the board, and accessibility feels that too. So we have to be discerning and approach which hill we want to die on this week.
All right, well, we've got 1 minute left. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
I want to end with accessibility is a ever moving end zone. The requirements change, right? WCAG, I started doing this work when WCAG 2.1 was still the requirement. Now we have WCAG 2, WCAG 3 or 2.2 is coming up. We have WCAG 3. the goalpost moves. There's new technology, new innovation, new AI, and so if you're looking for a career in something that will continue to challenge you and keep your interest and not get mundane ever. I've never had a day go by in this work, knock on wood, where I'm like, oh man, it's only like 2 o'clock. When's this day gonna end? Like I'm all of a sudden like it's already 5. Where the heck did my day go? My days go by so fast. And this accessibility work is ever changing, and I learn new things every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just for resources' sake, since we are at the end, I want to share with you all that if you do want to dive deeper, Salesforce has a trailhead called Digital Accessibility Trail Mix on their Trailhead platform. So that'll provide you a great introduction and at a manageable pace. And then there is also, as I mentioned before, WCAG, WCAG. Those are the guidelines that all accessibility decisions are based on. So becoming familiar with those is absolutely free and something that you could always tap into. And then last but not least, consider getting your IAAP certification in either web accessibility specialist or CPACC. And Kristian, can you help me break down that
Certified,
acronym?
yes, ma'am. Certified Professional Accessibility Core Competency.
Yes, those will get picked up by the algorithms when you submit your resumes. And those are the industry leading certifications for this type of work. So good luck. And I hope you all get a rewarding career out of accessibility.
Wonderful. Shyanne, Kristian, thank you both so much. We are so grateful for your time today. Thank you to everyone who's joined us for this session. We are going to take a 15-minute break, but stay with us because our last session of the day, our fireside chat, Accessibility is Everyone's Job, is coming up next. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Bye.